Welcome back to the deep dive. I was reading about this experiment, and it just like captured my imagination. And I knew we had to share it. It involves AI, like contrasting worldviews, and some seriously thought-provoking questions about global issues. Have you ever wondered like how an optimist and a cynic might see the same problem?
Hmm.
Well, that's what we're diving into today.
What's so intriguing is that it leverages AI, specifically ChatGPT, to simulate those contrasting perspectives.
Yeah.
It really highlights how we as humans crave diverse viewpoints to grapple with these complex issues.
Right. So the individual behind this experiment, Mike, used a technique called prompt engineering to create these two distinct AI personalities within ChatGPT. It's like giving the AI specific instructions to shape its responses and embody different worldviews. And the personalities he came up with are fascinating. First, we have spiritual Jimmy, the optimist, always seeking the silver lining and emphasizing interconnectedness and human potential.
It's a perspective that often resonates with those who believe in the power of collective action and the inherent goodness of humanity.
Exactly. And then we have dark data Mike, the pragmatist, a bit of a cynic, who analyzes things through a data-driven lens, often delivering blunt, even bleak assessments.
This approach tends to appeal to those who prioritize logic and realism, often questioning idealistic notions and focusing on practical solutions.
So Mike decided to pit these two AI personalities against each other, asking them to weigh in on some major global issues. And trust me, their responses are anything but predictable. The first topic he threw at them was overpopulation. That looming question whether our planet can sustain a growing population. Spiritual Jimmy, but true to his optimistic nature, believes we actually have enough resources. It's our distribution and consumption habits that are the real problem.
It's a view that emphasizes sustainability, responsible consumption, and finding harmony with nature. It suggests that if we change our behavior, we can overcome resource scarcity.
It's a hopeful perspective. But then, Dark Data throws a wrench in the gears. He argues that there are simply too many people and not enough resources to go around. His solutions, well, they're a bit more, shall we say, drastic. He suggests population reduction, which is definitely a controversial concept, or developing technology that allows us to survive in extremely cramped conditions. Basically adapting to a world with limited space and resources.
Those solutions highlight a tension at the heart of many global challenges, balancing idealistic aspirations with pragmatic constraints. And it forces us to confront some uncomfortable ethical questions. For instance, is it morally justifiable to prioritize technological solutions over addressing the root causes of overpopulation, such as poverty and lack of access to education and family planning?
You've shared some really insightful thoughts on overpopulation before. I'm curious, how do these AI perspectives align with or challenge your views?
That's a great question. I think both Spiritual Jimmy and Dark Data Mike offer valuable insights, though I lean more towards addressing the systemic issues that contribute to overpopulation, rather than focusing solely on technological fixes. But the stark contrast in their approaches really underscores the complexity of the issue.
It definitely does. Now buckle up, because Mike's next question takes us into the realm of international relations. He asks these AI personalities, when will the war in Ukraine end? Spiritual Jimmy, always the optimist, responds with a vision of peace achieved through love and cooperation, a world where humanity chooses unity over division.
It's a perspective grounded in the belief that human nature can evolve, that we can overcome our differences and find common ground.
It's a beautiful sentiment. But then Dark Data Mike jumps in with a dose of cold, hard realism. He claims war only ends when one side collapses, or when it no longer makes strategic or economic sense to continue fighting. In his view, it's all about power dynamics, calculated moves, and ultimately self-interest.
It's a perspective that emphasizes the historical patterns of conflict and the often brutal realities of international relations.
And it raises some really important questions. Can peace truly be achieved through love and cooperation alone? Or is it naive to ignore the role of power and self-preservation in global conflicts?
That's the crux of the debate, isn't it? Is there a middle ground where practical solutions can be aligned with ethical aspirations? Can we strive for peace while acknowledging the complexities of human nature and the power structures that shape our world?
These are the kinds of questions that keep me up at night. It's fascinating how those contrasting perspectives, even though generated by AI, mirror the debates we have as humans. But let's move on to a topic that hits a little closer to home for all of us: pharmaceutical choices. Mike asks his AI personalities a very pointed question. If a company has a super effective drug that doesn't make much money, and a less effective one that's a cash cow, which one do they choose? It's a dilemma that exposes the inherent tension between profit-driven motives and ethical considerations, especially in an industry that directly impacts human health and well-being.
You're absolutely right. It forces us to examine the incentives driving pharmaceutical companies and question whether their decisions prioritize patient well-being or their bottom line.
So, spiritual Jimmy, with his unwavering faith in humanity, believes that good medicine can prevail if we demand transparency and fairness within the healthcare industry. He argues that we as consumers have the power to influence corporate behavior by choosing ethical companies and advocating for policies that prioritize patient needs over profit margins.
It's a hopeful perspective, but it relies on the assumption that consumers have access to accurate information and the ability to make informed choices, which isn't always the case, especially in complex healthcare systems.
I see your point. And speaking of a less optimistic view, Dark Data Mike doesn't hold back. He argues that companies prioritize profit above all else, claiming that the less effective drug will win out simply because it generates more revenue. Ethics, he suggests, take a back seat when profits are at stake.
It's a cynical, but perhaps realistic, assessment of the current state of the pharmaceutical industry. It challenges us to consider whether self-regulation is sufficient to ensure ethical conduct, or if we need stronger external mechanisms, like government regulations and consumer advocacy groups, to hold companies accountable.
It's a tough pill to swallow, especially when we're talking about something as essential as healthcare. I have to admit, that perspective makes me question the narratives we often hear about companies prioritizing patient well-being. It makes you wonder, can we truly trust them to make ethical decisions when profits are on the line? What do you think?
I think it's healthy to approach such claims with a critical eye. It's not about assuming the worst of all companies, but about acknowledging the inherent tension between profit-driven motives and ethical considerations. And it's about empowering ourselves as consumers and citizens to demand transparency, accountability, and a healthcare system that prioritizes patient needs above all else. And it's about empowering ourselves as consumers and citizens to demand transparency, accountability, and a healthcare system that prioritizes patient needs above all else.
Well said. It's clear that this experiment is already making us confront some uncomfortable truths about how different perspectives shape our understanding of the world. But hold on tight, because there's more to come. Mike delves into even more complex and controversial topics, and you won't believe what these AI personalities have to say. So next, Mike shifts the focus to a more specific geopolitical situation: Sweden's decision to provide aid to Ukraine. Spiritual pen. Jimmy, in line with his worldview, sees this act as a beautiful example of global solidarity, a nation standing up for democracy and human rights, strengthening those international bonds of compassion and support.
It's a view that aligns with the concept of soft power in international relations, the idea that nations can exert influence not just through military might, but through diplomacy, aid, and the promotion of shared values.
It's definitely a heartwarming interpretation. But then Dark Data Mike, with his trademark skepticism, offers a completely different take. He suggests that Sweden's aid to Ukraine isn't purely altruistic. He sees it through a more strategic lens, arguing that Sweden is ultimately acting in its own self-interest, boosting its global image, securing alliances, and maintaining good standing with powerful entities like the EU and NATO.
This perspective encourages us to dig deeper, to consider the complex motivations behind seemingly benevolent actions on the world stage. It reminds us that nations, like individuals, often act with a mix of altruism and self-interest.
It makes you wonder if any action on the global stage is ever truly selfless. Do you think nations are capable of putting aside their own interests for the greater good?
It's a complex question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. Humanitarianism and self-interest are often intertwined, and it's difficult to disentangle them completely. Even in situations where aid is genuinely intended to help those in need, there are often strategic benefits for the donor nation. But I think it's important to recognize that these motivations aren't mutually exclusive. An action can be both altruistic and strategic at the same time.
That's a really nuanced perspective. It reminds us to look beyond simplistic explanations and embrace the complexity of international relations.
Okay, ready for another thought-provoking topic? Mike decides to throw a curveball at his AI personalities, asking them about the origins of COVID-19. A topic that sparked countless debates and conspiracy theories.
This should be interesting. It's a topic that's rife with uncertainty and speculation, making it fertile ground for exploring contrasting perspectives. Exactly. So, spiritual Jimmy, always seeking a higher meaning, sees the emergence of COVID-19 as a natural event, a stark reminder of human vulnerability and the interconnectedness of life on Earth. He views it as a call for global cooperation and a shared responsibility to protect our planet and each other.
It's a perspective that emphasizes our shared humanity, and the
Yeah.
need to work together to address global challenges like pandemics and climate change.
It's a message of unity and resilience. But dark data, Mike, never one to shy away from controversy, takes a much darker approach. He acknowledges the possibility of a lab leak or natural spread, but then goes on to suggest that pandemics throughout history have been exploited as a means of population control, whether intentional or not, he claims. The COVID-19 pandemic was used to instill fear and exert control over populations.
This viewpoint, while potentially unsettling, underscores the importance of critical thinking and questioning official narratives. It reminds us that information, especially during times of crisis, can be manipulated and weaponized.
It's definitely a chilling thought. The idea that a pandemic could be exploited for nefarious purposes really makes you question everything you've heard. It highlights the need to be discerning consumers of information and to consider alternative perspectives, even if they challenge the mainstream narrative.
Absolutely. Especially in today's information landscape, where misinformation can spread rapidly. It's crucial to develop those critical thinking skills and to seek out evidence from credible sources.
And that brings us to Mike's final question, one that's been weighing heavily on many minds. Will there be a World War III? Why is Sweden increasing its defense spending? And what's with the Prime Minister's talk about defending the country with weapons in hand?
These are questions that reflect a growing sense of unease and uncertainty on the global stage. It'll be fascinating to see how our two AI personalities grapple with such weighty issues.
It's heartbreaking to think about, the impact on those innocent lives, especially children who are caught in the crossfire. This whole experiment with Spiritual Jimmy and Dark Data Mike, it's been a real roller coaster. Moments of hope and inspiration, mixed with some pretty sobering realities. It's definitely challenged my own assumptions and made me think about global issues in a whole new light. What about you? What are your biggest takeaways from this deep dive?
I think what strikes me most is how these contrasting AI personalities reflect the internal struggles we all face. When we're trying to make sense of the world, we want to hold on to hope, to believe in the power of human goodness and our ability to create a better future. But we also have to grapple with the complexities of human nature, the systems we've created, and the historical patterns that suggest progress isn't always linear.
It's that constant tension between idealism and realism, right?
Yeah.
We need both. The dreamers who inspire us to reach for a better world, and the pragmatists who keep us grounded in the realities we face.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, recognizing that both perspectives hold a piece of the puzzle. Spiritual Jimmy reminds us to nurture that spark of hope, to believe in the possibility of positive change, even when things seem bleak. He encourages us to tap into our collective power to address global challenges, to choose love and cooperation over fear and division.
And I have to say, his optimism is contagious. It's a much-needed antidote to the negativity that often dominates the news cycle. But then we have Dark Data Mike, who, while maybe not as uplifting, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. He challenges us to question our assumptions, to dig deeper, to look beyond the surface and examine the underlying motivations and power structures that shape our world.
He reminds us that critical thinking is essential, especially in a world saturated with information, where truth can be elusive and manipulation is rampant. He encourages us to develop a healthy skepticism, to seek out evidence from diverse sources, and to be wary of simplistic explanations.
He's definitely the voice of caution, urging us to prepare for potential threats and to be realistic about the challenges we face. It's not always easy to hear, but I think his perspective is just as valuable as Spiritual Jimmy's. It's about seeing the world through a wider lens, acknowledging both the light and the shadow.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the complexity, the nuance, the messy reality of it all. That's where true understanding lies.
So this experiment has given us a framework for analyzing current events and understanding different viewpoints. As you continue exploring the world around you, ask yourself, what would Spiritual Jimmy say about this? What would Dark Data Mike's perspective be? It might surprise you how much clarity and depth you gain by considering those contrasting viewpoints.
It's a powerful tool for navigating the, complexities of our world. By engaging with diverse perspectives, even those that challenge our own beliefs, we can develop a more nuanced understanding of global issues and our role in shaping a better future.
It's well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I hope it sparked some reflection and maybe even inspired you to look at the world with a fresh perspective. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open.